What's going on, you guys? Theo here with the big review, back yet again with another King of Fighters All-Star video, and today we continue our ongoing series taking a look at the FES fighters by element and ranking them in tier lists for PVE content. But before we jump into that, make sure you genocide cutter that like button, that subscribe button. Helps me out a ton as a new YouTuber. But today we're going to be taking a look at the green element as we begin to wrap up this week of tier lists. So, getting into the green element, you're going to notice from looking at the pool, it is kind of thin, and really the big thing that is going to be kind of a theme in this video is you're going to notice that from the top couple, they're pretty strong, and then it gets pretty thin. There's a big gap between the top two and then everybody else, which you guys can probably guess who the top two are, but I digress. So, I will also say with this list, just to preface things, this was the first time I had brought in multiple people. I actually brought in 3 or 4 people for second, third, and fourth opinions. For this, I think I even got a 5th or a 6th at some point with some of these. So this one was a bit tough because it is kind of a largely subjective color because there aren't a lot of standouts here. So yeah, this was a fun one to collaborate with other veteran players on, other players that have these characters at high awakening levels. But before we jump into the list, let's talk about criteria. And so criteria, as always, is going to be overall kit, first and foremost. Then, obviously, it's going to come down to their competition. How do they compare and stack up to their peers in their color? And then the third and final thing that we always take into account is versatility across multiple modes. So, with all that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into this tier list. I'm not going to be doing an honorable mention because there are some things at the end of the video I wanted to talk about with some minor updates to the game. But for kind of honorable mention side of things, if you guys want to take a look at some of the green defense characters like an Ash Crimson for RHD, or even Iori, who is definitely not a PvE character, you can do so as kind of honorable mentions in here. But you do need those to get through RHD at the highest tiers, but that is just something I felt like I would throw in as an aside. But let's go ahead and jump into the list. And at the number 5 position and kicking off the list is going to be Katsura. So Katsura is a character from the Gintama collab, and overall with Katsura, his biggest claim to fame has always been his fantastic PG gain and then his ability to just fire off his finisher left and right. Now, for those of you who were not around for the Gintama collab, you may not know this, but there are 2 very different camps with Katsura. You either have the people who love him, or you have the people who hate him. So, some people love him for things like time attack or time-sensitive modes where they need a kind of good budget clock stopper, but other people can't stand him because his skills are not necessarily geared towards PvE, and outside of his kind of gimmick of being able to fire off his finishers consistently, he doesn't have a lot going on for his kit. But as you can tell from the level mine is at, you probably know what camp I was in, but as I talked to more top PvE players, more veterans, to get second opinions for this list and get their kind of input, he kept coming up as kind of a good back-end pick for this, being that it's kind of a thin pool for PvE characters. So we went ahead and we went with Katsura. So with Katsura, first and foremost, his leadership skill is going to increase Gintama fighters' attack by 55%. If you look at his cores and scroll down here, you're going to see that he is going to have gains 2% power on a cooldown of 4 seconds and decreases his damage received by 30% for 4 seconds upon landing a crit. Then he has buffs Make the Game, which is the Gintama exclusive, 10% chance to gain 20% power upon landing a skill when his HP is 50% or more on a cooldown of 12 seconds. 10% chance to deal additional damage equal to 400% of attack to all enemies upon landing a skill when his HP is 49% or less on a cooldown of 12 seconds. And then finally, disables target's roll for 4 seconds upon landing an active skill, cooldown 15 seconds, and increases his attack by 20% for 4 seconds. So, overall with Katsura, you take a look at his skills here. He's going to have burn damage. He's going to have a 50% chance to stun the enemy for 2 seconds upon landing a skill. He's going to have a 25% chance to ignore the guard, as well as gain super armor on his S3. So, all that being said, really with Katsura, his biggest claim to fame yet again is just going to be his finisher, being able to consistently fire that off and keep the clock under control. So overall, he is almost unrivaled in his ability to gain power. The problem with him has always been damage output. If his damage output matched his ability to fire off finishers, then he would be much better. And what would make him better still is if his skill animations weren't so kind of wacky. But overall with him, he is a decent character, and again, this is where you start to see, when you compare this slot to the number 1 slot, the number 2 slot, the gap in power is very apparent. But let's go ahead and move on to our number 4 pick. Coming in at the number 4 position is going to be Lady Geese Howard. So, Lady Geese Howard is a character that I have had since the day she dropped. I'm a huge Geese Howard fan, so that was a character that I felt I really needed when she came out, and I am definitely never have regretted getting her. Now, with her, though, she does have some glaring issues that do stand out in her kit, but we'll get into that. First, let's talk about her leadership. So she's going to increase Lady Fighter's attack by 55%, which is very good. You actually see her as a leader. Intermittently, people will use her to buff things like Lady Zero, which is very nice, or Lady Maxima. So she actually has a very nice use in that regard. But yeah, her leadership skill, very strong. If you look at her core effects, this is where things start to get a little bit strange with her, because she does have kind of a odd kit. So she's going to have becomes immune to damage for 2 seconds when attacked if HP is 50% or more. That's got a cooldown of 15 seconds. And then she's going to decrease her damage received by 50% for 3 seconds when attacked if her HP is 49% or less, on a cooldown of 17 seconds. And then she's going to have on her last core deals additional damage equal to 250% of attack upon landing a skill on a target in darkness on a cooldown of 12 seconds. And then she obviously has a PvP exclusive core, but not going to play obviously into this tier list. So, outside of that, she does have some pretty good kind of mix of generic cores up here with 15% power charge rate increase, a plus 840 attack increase, 8% attack damage increase against attack types, which I never like the specific ones when they come to type specifics. So, but yeah, overall you can tell from just looking at her cores that she's a character that's really just built to apply darkness and do damage, and that's really all she's good for. You look at her skills, and she's going to have another increase to attack, with this time by 30%. She's going to apply darkness. She has super armor on her S2, and on her S3 she's going to have a 50% chance to reset the cooldown of Rugal. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things with her that if she had a 3 PG rather, which the ladies tend to always get 5 PGs and not 3 PGs. If she had a 3 PG, this would help her a ton. Her biggest issue is it does have grabs in her kit, specifically when it comes to her finisher, as you'll see down here, that just kind of hold her back in bossing. That really hinders her. The other thing that hinders her is going to be the fact that, obviously, she isn't able to fire off finishers as much as she would like to as a PvE kind of oriented character. So overall with her, she's going to see a lot of play, though, against anything that requires darkness, whether you're actually using her or putting her as a striker, although I would argue that a lot of times she's just very good to use in general now. Like things in Guild Raid and things like that, there are characters that don't even deal darkness that are used over her, so that's why I didn't feel she necessarily deserved to be any higher. She's never going to be a character, I feel like, that is going to shoot up the ranks at this point. I think she's kind of hit her ceiling, and she'll probably at some point soon become more and more outdated as more darkness dealers come out. But as far as damage goes, she's very strong for it. Being a attack type helps her out a ton as far as being able to take advantage of good leaderships from other characters. So overall, not a character I felt I could really push any higher than this. Didn't feel like she was really deserving of anything above that, but still strong in her own right. So let's move on to number 3. Coming in at the number 3 position is a character we should all be pretty familiar with by now, because we just talked about her recently, and that is going to be Shane. So Shane is, if you watched my review, she's a character that I have issues with, but at the same time, being that Green is so thin as far as top tier characters, she just by default ends up in this position. Now, is she the perfect PvE character? No, but she's not a terrible one either. She's kind of that above average role where she'll get the job done, she'll do things that you need her to do, she just won't be the ideal pick in some scenarios, she just might end up being the only pick. So let's take a look at her leadership first. Increases green element fighters' attack by 55%. The standard kind of fare for your 7 Knights characters, very strong, very good. Although when it comes to green, there are other leaders at this point that are going to be far superior, which we'll get into. But when you take a look at her cores here, and go down, you're going to see she becomes immune to damage for 2 seconds and increases attack by 35% for 4 seconds when her power is 3 or less. That's got a cooldown of 20 seconds. And then the 7 Knights exclusive, which increases her attack by 20% and decreases her damage received by 20% when her HP is 50% or more. And then you also have increases damage dealt to target by 15% for 7 seconds upon landing her Slashing Fiend, and decreases damage received by 25%, which then resets the cooldown of Soul Slayer on a cooldown of 20 seconds. And then the rest of her kind of skills there are cores rather, are kind of decent, but really they all just basically boil back around to doing more damage, which is kind of all she is really wanting to do. She just wants to deal a ton of damage and little else. She is kind of glassy, but you'll notice she has a lot of sources of armor to protect herself. However, if those things are down, she is going to melt pretty quickly. On her S1, she's going to have super armor. She's also going to have decreased damage received by 80%. She's going to have super armor yet again on her S2, as well as stun. And then on her S3, she is going to have increased to her attack by 28%. So overall with Shane, the biggest thing with her that you would probably ever be doing is using her for her leadership skill and her great damage. Outside of that, she lacks dots to really put her over the top. Now, she does have very nice finishers, and therefore that's obviously kind of goes with the territory when you're talking about 7 Knights, but that's very useful. The problem with her is her skills can be a little wonky for mobbing. They do tend to split mobs and miss things and so on and so forth. Although she does so much damage, her one-tap potential is very strong, so typically anything she does connect with, she's going to just wipe off the board. But overall with her, I think that this is kind of where you start to see Green get a little bit better on this list, but then you're going to see that major power spike that I mentioned in the kind of intro here. So yeah, that's going to be Shane. Overall, pretty strong character for PvE. Mainly you're going to use her yet again for that leadership skill, but let's go ahead and move into the top 2, which will probably be a little controversial, but let's talk about it. So coming in at number 2 is Goenitz. This was a very tough decision for me to make, and this is actually what inspired me to start asking the rest of the guys that I usually talk to when it comes to these tough decisions to try and get a better gauge for kind of how people are feeling. You know, fellow players that have these characters at A4, A5, that play every day, that grind through the same endgame content. I needed to get some second opinions, and it seemed as though everyone kind of had the same reaction when I asked the question, which was, that's a really tough call, but we think that Goenitz should be number 2. And so here we are, Goenitz is number 2, and it's been a long time since Goenitz has not been the top green in the PvE pool, or just the green pool in general, but here we are. So first and foremost, his leadership skill is going to increase Orochi clan fighters' attack by 30% and their critical rate by 13%. Nothing special, nothing you're probably ever going to use. We all pretty much know what Goenitz does, but we'll go through here. So maybe some people have somehow missed this, but I have a hard time believing unless you've been living under a rock. But he's going to decrease the target's attack by 17% for 5 seconds when attacking a bleeding enemy, and then he's going to inflict bleed damage equal to 46% of attack to the target every 1 second for 3 seconds upon landing a crit. So Goenitz, his biggest thing is just doing a lot of damage, a lot of damage, spamming skills very, very quickly, and using his finishers to keep the clock stopped. His kind of kit overall has always been, since his buffs back in the day, which, believe it or not, for new players that don't know this, he used to not be good. There was a long time there where Goenitz was at the bottom of the barrel, and then he got buffed, and then he became a god. And so here we are now where he is still one of the premier PvE characters in the game. So when you look at his skills, he's going to increase his critical rate by 12% for 7 seconds. He has a disable targets roll for 3 seconds. He has an increase to his attack by 28% for 7 seconds. And then he's going to have bleed damage, as well as, if you take a look here, hyper armor on his S3. And then you get into his finishers, which he has some pretty decent alternatives. He does have a 3PG that has a pretty quick animation, but for like Immortals and things like that, you're probably just going to want to use his 5PG. So yeah, so with him overall, he's a green attack. He's going to take advantage of great leaderships, and you see that a ton. You'll see paired with characters kind of like a Orochi, Ori, or now the character that is going to have taken over his spot at number 1 on this list, which we'll get to. But overall, Goenitz is still as good as he ever was. He's still an incredible character. There are key factors that play into why he is I can no longer really comfortably put him at number 1. I will say it's definitely a close call, but it's definitely a call that had to be made in the direction that I made it. But if you are a fan of Goenitz, if you're somebody that is obviously, an evangelist for him because he has gotten you through so much content, then don't worry, he is still just as good as he ever was. It's just that because of certain things, again, we'll get to, but yeah, he is still Goenitz, he's still great, but I do feel that it is time to move him down the ranks to number 2. But to fully get into why, let's talk about who is number 1, which I'm sure all of you already know what's coming. And at the number 1 position is going to be Boss Syndrome Orochi. So with Boss Syndrome Orochi, I had done the big review about a month ago, and when I did that review, he was pretty fresh, and I said in my review, after I'd given the rating, that I was leaving him some room to grow because we had not had a chance to take a look a ton at what he was able to do against specific bosses in kind of the Immortals and things of that nature, because obviously those rotate. So it was one of those situations where I felt like his kind of room for growth was very good, and he has taken full advantage of that. Now, with him, the reason why he is the new number 1 for green is obviously beyond the fact that his damage output is insane, beyond the fact that his ability to charge his power gauge and fire off finishers with his fantastic 3PG is absolutely absurd. Beyond those things, he has a couple of things over Goenitz that Goenitz just can't do. So first and foremost, being that he is going to be a Boss Syndrome character, he has an extra 3 seconds of rotation on his awakening. So that alone is absolutely a big part of his kit whenever it comes to PvE content, especially when you consider the fact that he's able to charge as much as he is. But then the other thing is going to be the fact that he has the imprint stones exclusive to the Boss Syndrome characters, which, as we all know, kind of make or break characters at this point. Mine aren't even fully maxed out, and I don't even have the third one on here, although I do have it. But it is just one of those things where his kind of perks that are in here that are unique to him as a Boss Syndrome character set him apart. But the other thing that is important to note is his leadership skill. Increasing boss fighters' attack by 45% and their power charge rate by 20% is one of the best leaderships in the entire game, because it doesn't just extend to Boss Syndrome characters, it's all boss fighters in general. So your Lady Zeros, your Goenitzes, any character that is going to have your boss fighter tag that's down here, as you'll see, is going to benefit, and so that makes him a de facto leader for some of the best characters in the game, which is very important. When you look at his overall kit, we've taken a look at it ad nauseum at this point, but he has a ton of damage ramp with his penetration and his attack ramp. He's going to have a 50% chance to reset his cooldowns of 2 of his 3 skills, which you'll see here. So having the fact that he's able to charge his power as fast as he can, deal as much damage as he can, have an extra 3 seconds to do that damage on his awakening rotation, having one of the best leadership skills in the entire game, overall, all of that alone would make him extremely relevant, but when you factor in the imprint stones, it's to the point where you can't argue against him. So at the end of the day, I feel like he has proven his stripes at this point now that we've seen him in some of these other modes. He's become one of the premier damage dealers, clock stoppers in the game. So number one, I feel comfortable giving to Orochi, especially after getting many opinions on it. So that is going to be the list, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, this was a far less straightforward list, and it took a lot more input from a lot of other players for me to put this together, because this is not an easy decision to make with some of these. There just aren't a lot of premier PvE candidates here, and again, the drop-off from the top two downward is just, you see it. It's very apparent. So overall, that is going to be it. Let me know in the comments section below what you guys think. But before we move on to KoF 15 news, I do want to touch on the new stuff that was dropped real quick, because it's not anything too crazy, but we have the new bingo game. We talked about it briefly yesterday. So it looks like, based on what I've seen here, these are going to be pretty much identical to the previous bingo that we had. So overall, just finish these over time. I believe you have about, looks like 2 weeks or so to finish this up. So, you have plenty of time to get through it. So just make sure you do, because you do get a fair bit of capsules as well as rubies in there. And then it's always nice to get these hammers down here. Obviously, this is not going to be a selector for the FES memory. It is going to end up being a random box, which, it happens. I mean, it's better than nothing. And then you have the imprint stone selection box, but these are just your generic pluses. So these have gotten a little outdated, but still nice to have. The other part of this update was going to end up being your new super mission. If you take a look at the new super mission, you're going to see that the rewards each day are going to end up being for your mileage. Imprint stone mystery boxes, again, for the generic stones that are not necessarily the best anymore. And then if you move on further down the list here, you'll see you get 2 elite enhancement hammers. Wonderful. It's great. This is a very stingy super mission. Outside of the gold hammers you see for this last one here for day 7, you see, I believe, 1 here, and then maybe 1 more here. Nope, not even there. Yeah. So overall, this is a very stingy one. They don't give you a whole lot of the hammers that you would want. Yeah, there's your other one there. So yeah, you don't get a whole lot of the golds. You don't get a whole lot of the elites. It's kind of whatever. The overall goal is to get this imprint stone selection box, but again, it's just another generic plus one. So, not bad, but not great either. So that is going to be the super mission. But let's go ahead before we end the video and move on to the King of Fighters 15 news, which is going to be a new character reveal trailer. So let's get into that. All right, you guys. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Mei Tenkun trailer that was dropped last night. So basically, it looks like we are going through all of Team China at this point, assuming that he is still going to be on Team China. But Mei Tenkun is kind of a fun little character. He's always sleepy. Uses a pillow. It's kind of fun. But yeah, so overall with Mei Tenkun, he is looking pretty good. He's going to be beating up on his teammate here of Shuni, which tends to be, it looks like a theme here. It looks like we're going to be getting Shun getting a ton of attention with KoF 15, but overall the biggest takeaway here, because there's not much to talk about, is because this is all just going to be kind of a skill showcase really, but it's nice that they're doing these weekly. It keeps information coming, whether it's a lot of information or not. Obviously it's not a whole lot, but it's nice to get this weekly. As you'll see there, they're telling us we're going to get more next week, so it's kind of cool. Everybody was kind of expecting Kyo this week, so it's kind of nice to see a kind of a surprise, but overall, this is a pretty fun little trailer just for the fact that we do get to see more of the graphics, and the graphics look fine. I mean, again, for those that don't like the more 3D-ish, they're not going to be sold whatsoever, but, I don't mind it. Obviously, there's things I would prefer, but I don't hate it. It's not bad at all. It looks fine for what it is, and it does have kind of that, again, that anime look to it, as I've said in the past, but overall, we'll have to wait and see when they decide they're going to give us more information as far as actual mechanics and things like that, but this is a pretty nice little kind of short teaser of more kind of character info, but That's pretty much it. Not a lot to talk about there, but I figured I would show it to you guys. If you want to make sure you watch it on your own time to get some of the music in there too, that's nice. But anyway, guys, that's going to be today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it. So we're going to finish up the tier lists tomorrow, but until then, make sure that you reppuken that like button, that subscribe button, and I will see you guys in the next one. You all have a great day. Peace.
Continue.